All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Kate Gibo, and I'm the director of the Cohen Institute for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State College. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to today's virtual event, which is titled The Making of a Holocaust Center at Keene State College. If you read the description for this event online, you will know that in 2024, Dr. Paul Vincent published a book titled A Holocaust Center at Keene State College, the first 24 years, 1983 to 2007. And this book traces the origins of the Holocaust Resource Center and its evolution into the early days of the Cohen Center, which today we now know as the Cohen Institute. Today's lunchtime webinar will feature the author in conversation with Professor Rodney Obien, who is our Keene State College College Archivist, and they will be discussing the making of this institutional history. So we will be online together until around 12:45, as this is part of our Lunch and Learn series for the spring. So I'm just going to start by reading our speakers and our guests' abbreviated bios, and then from there I'll turn it over to them to jump right into the conversation. So Dr. Paul Vincent was director of the Cohen Center from 1998 until 2007, and he's Professor Emeritus of Holocaust and Genocide Studies. He chaired the department from its founding in 2008 until his retirement in 2017. And I'll remind you, these are the very abbreviated bios because there's much more we could say in terms of accolades for both Paul and for Rodney. Professor Rodney Obien heads Keene State College's Special Collections and Archives and teaches in the MA program in History and Archives as well. And Rodney was the editor of the book that was published by Paul in 2024 as well. So Rodney and Paul, thank you so much for being with us today to discuss the creation of this book that traces the history of what came to be known as the Cohen Center. I'm going to turn it right over to the two of you to jump into today's conversation. Thank you for being with us. So Rodney, maybe I'll turn it to you.
Sure. Thank you, Kate. So, well, Paul, I can't believe we made it to this point. I mean, it was almost like yesterday that we were talking about this book in the Tiergarten in Berlin, and so it's a long journey to get it together and published. So it's great to have an opportunity for you to share about the history, and I'm hoping in the latter part of our conversation you can read some excerpts from it. So I have a couple of questions for you, and maybe you have some questions for me, but I want to ask you. What made you want to write this history? What's your motivation for it?
Oh, it's a wonderful question, and I'll try to make it as abbreviated as possible. But before I do, I just want to thank you, and I want to thank Kate and the Cohen Institute for arranging this. I think knowing more about the foundation of this organization is incredibly important. And so it's an institutional history, but that institutional history, I think, it involves a large number of topics and emotions, dedication that I think people should be aware of. And so that's what I attempted to cover in the book. It was not, when I left the center in 2007, this is when Hank Knight came on board. I went on sabbatical and I had a fellowship in DC. Jan Cohen asked if I would write a history of the center. So that was at a time, obviously, when it was just the first 24 years. And I found it intriguing, but put it off and put it off and put it off. There were other things to do. Then we had somebody here named Hikmet Karzak. He came from Bosnia-Herzegovina, from Sarajevo, and he was a fellow that we had as part of the academic program. And somehow he picked up the urgency from Jan, and he started asking me about writing it. But it wasn't until Hank retired, and that didn't happen until, I believe, 2018, 2019, that it hit me. If this is going to be done, it needs to be done now. And in large measure because people were passing away, And memories were starting memories are always a problem. And so memories were starting to get weak. And so I was going to have to rely on other than memories for most of what was written. So that's what led me to it. It wasn't an initial thing. It was something that evolved.
Yeah, no, I think in our conversation too, it was really essential that you captured the memory, but also so we can archive it. And so the book, that's sort of a recurring theme in our conversations, that for what it's worth, the book is an archival record of the center, and so as an anchor as we go forward. But I wanted to ask, so how did you go about writing this? Because I know it's as an archivist, it's I have some of the records of the center, but not everything that was produced. So how did you go about writing?
Okay, I wouldn't undervalue what you have there. The how is incredibly important. I was incredibly fortunate to have Anna Tilton as my assistant, and she held on to everything. She kept records of what was of interviews, what was in the newspaper, all of our programs. She kept a couple of binders that were filled with these documents, and they ended up with you. They ended up in the archive, and I think this is another of these examples that if you want to write an institutional history, it's absolutely essential that institution have its own archival resource. And I think that has been a blessing for Keene State College and certainly for the Holocaust Center to have had this over the years. So that was important. Now, by the time I started doing this, Chuck had passed away, and a few other people that had been involved had died as well. And then others who knew him and who were involved in the center all the way from the 1980s on. Obviously, some of their memories were becoming dimmer. So I did rely on interviews. I relied on interviews with some of his colleagues, people on campus that knew his work and not only appreciated it, but actually embraced it very early on. And then I also talked to the Vice President for Academic Affairs at the time, Dick Gustafson, who went on to be the president of what became Southern New Hampshire University. And he had some very good memories to share with me as well. So it was largely going through the material, sifting through, trying to find connections. And the fortunate thing during the time that Chuck was in the center, and again, even though Anna came on board fairly late in his tenure as director of the center, she did a fine job of putting together materials that had been organized over the previous years and making them very readable and understandable. And I was able to make use of a lot of material right from the outset. Ironically, one of the great sources that I had unexpectedly was Oakle Johnson, who was, I think at the time, he was the interim provost, and we chatted at a gathering here in the Cohen Center. I think it was when the facility was, the new facility was dedicated. And he shared a story that was passed to him by Stu Goff. Stu Goff was a mathematician who was the dean of the college at the time. And this was way back in 1979. And it's an important piece of what happens here. Stu Goff knew that Chuck was burned out. He was getting tired. He'd been teaching since the 1950s at that point. He'd been at Keene State since 1968 or 69. And he was having trouble connecting with the students in the way that he wanted to. And Stu had a flyer. These were in the days when you had interoffice mail. You certainly didn't have email. And everybody had little slots that they pulled their mail out of. And Stu slipped in a slot an announcement of a Holocaust conference that was going to happen in Philadelphia. And he thought this might be a way of triggering Chuck's passion again. And he was absolutely right. Chuck came to him and said, I think I'd like to go to this, but I don't have the time and I don't have the money. And Chuck, or Stu, very forcefully said to Chuck, you have the time, I have the money, you're going. And it's one of those little moments in history that I think ends up transforming an institution. Chuck went and he was so taken with it that that's what triggered a change in him. It's like the tectonic plates of his mind were moved by what he heard there. So that was crucial.
So and that sort of leads into my next question. And writing this history, in the process of writing, what other things did you learn about Chuck Hildebrand? He is in a lot of ways the main character in the book. As are you, but certainly, what other things did you find out, learn in the process of writing the history?
Thank you. That is such an important question. There was a gathering in honor of Chuck in 1992. It was after maybe the third or fourth movement of the center. It had been moved back into the library at that time, into a larger space. And Jay Kahn and the local rabbi and a few other people decided there was a need to honor Chuck. It had been 10 years at that point since he took a sabbatical, the first one he ever had in his career, and started gathering information and books that would be part of what was then to be called the Holocaust Resource Center. Judith Sternick, who was president of the college at the time, she introduced the program, and it had people from all over the area. And she said that this program is about the Holocaust Resource Center, and it's also about Chuck Hildebrand. And it's easy to talk about them both because, in fact, had there not been a Chuck Hildebrand, there would be a Holocaust Resource Center. What I learned about Chuck more than anything is, and this is so often the case with the creator, whatever it is that's being created, it is their passion. And he was so passionate about what he was doing. He once said in an interview that when asked why there's a Holocaust Center at Keene State College, it's a state college and there are hardly any Jews, he said, there should be a Holocaust Center at every college in the country. It's just too important an issue for people to understand. And that passion comes through in virtually every interview. And every time that he's on the radio, any time that he's in front of a class, you heard that passion. This is important. We need to understand. In fact, one of the things that he said, and it's so important, he said the people that carried out the Holocaust, they weren't monsters. They weren't crazy. And in fact, that's what makes them more frightening. They were ordinary people like you and me. And that was such a major part of his message. And what it aimed at saying is, this is something that anyone is capable of doing. And that means that, yes, it's a piece of history, but it's a piece of history that has effect on the world that we're living in now. And obviously, he's saying this back in the 1980s and 1990s, but that statement is as true in 2025 as it was when he said it.
Well, what about you? What about you? What did you learn about yourself? And we often hear about Chuck, but what about you? And as the director, as someone part of the early years. So and I wanted to press that with you because you're very modest about your role, but what did you learn about yourself in writing about the book?
I think what's fascinating about how this impacted me. Now, obviously, my doctorate's in German history, and it's in 20th century German history. My focus for most of my career after graduating with my PhD was the Weimar Republic. Obviously, knowing full well that there's this growing shadow throughout the years of the Weimar Republic that resolves itself with Hitler's appointment and the beginning of what we call the Third Reich. But that wasn't where my greatest interest was. It really was in the Weimar period, which is it's a period of frustration. It's a period that is glorified, rightly so, for the impact that it has on the arts, whether it's music or theater or literature or art itself. Neue Sachlichkeit, Dada, those years, roughly 14 years of the Weimar Republic, were and still remain precious to me. But the more that I worked on that, the more I realized, what follows, understanding what follows, trying to learn the trigger that led so many people to follow Hitler, to vote for the Nazi Party. That became increasingly important to me. And a fellow who's now long gone had asked me a couple of times if I would teach the Nazi Germany course. David Lenster was a historian here. And he didn't like teaching it. And I turned him down the first time. And finally, I did it. And that's when I started to really gain a better feel for the importance of understanding Nazi racial policy and also understanding what it was that motivated so many people to vote for this party. Now, it wasn't necessarily because they were all anti-Semitic. I think it's terribly important to know that. In fact, there were Jews that voted for the Nazi Party. But it was a sense of the fragility of democracy during the 1920s, leading into the early 30s, and its incapacity to deal with the problems that people were facing that led to this. So I pick up some of his passion. But what I understood about myself as opposed to Chuck is that the Holocaust Resource Center was in large measure a single person's effort. I was fortunate. I ultimately was blessed. I got a budget. I got a group of administrators to stand behind me and to be part of the original, what we called the Holocaust Center Advisory Board. I made some decisions that Chuck had resisted, but I decided to go with them, largely because I had been library director at Keene State for my first 9 years here. And I understood the power of having an advisory group. In that instance, it was an advisory group made up of faculty. But once I turned the corner and told Dr. Golden, who was the vice president for academic affairs at the time, that I wanted to make a change that Chuck didn't do, and that was have an advisory group that made up of both Keene State people as well as people from the larger community. I started something that was bigger than me. And so in terms of my tenure, I was always part of a group. For me, it refers back to what Hillary Clinton said, is it takes a village. And it took a village to grow this to what it was in 2007, which was quite different from what it was when I took over in 1998. But Chuck had some resistance against having a group like that. And I can understand some of the logic, and some of that he picked up when he traveled across the country speaking to people about the centers that they were creating. I think he was told to resist having an advisory group. I felt that the center could only benefit from having a larger group.
So I think before I want to leave time for you to read some excerpts from the book, because he has some wonderful stories. Any thoughts to sort of the current state of the institute, the center's now an institute. Is there any current thoughts and reflections or that might I don't know, any insights do you feel? So seeing it now as an institute from the center that you help guide and started.
Yeah, let me just say,
Okay, go ahead.
there is something about something that is created, whatever it might be. The center is one. The planet could be the other, in the beginning. And to some degree, I sometimes think that way when I think of Chuck. In the beginning, there was this man that had this passion and this idea, and he turned it into reality. He's the starting point. The next generation is somebody that knew him, and that was me. I knew Chuck. I'll have to confess, I didn't appreciate his passion until I wrote the history, because that's when I really got into his head and started to realize what he had done and the obstacles that he had to overcome to get what he had done. And I knew that put in that situation, I wouldn't have done it. But it's important to have that person who then picks up the baton and moves on with it. As the third chair, Hank Knight didn't know Chuck. Chuck was already pretty desperately ill when Hank got here and died a little more than a year later. Chuck died in 2008 in October, and Hank got here in June of 2007. And he didn't have a chance to really know who Chuck was, because Chuck was not Chuck by that point. So you then move on as time passes, and you've heard about the founder, you've read some of his stuff, but his passion is still remote to you. And regardless of what I put on a page, in trying to write the history, you never touch the actual reality of whatever the history is. You do your very best to do it, but the truth of it always eludes you. And I don't care what history it is that you're writing, whether I'm writing something about World War II or talking about it, or the Holocaust or something else. So I think that that's an important piece to recognize. Chuck wouldn't understand the world we're living in right now. He would be appalled. I suspect there'd be a piece of him that would say, "Why did I do this?" And to some degree, I suspect that goes through lots of people's minds as they leave something and let somebody else take it over, but also as they wonder about the impact that they have. Now, I know that there are scores of teachers still out there teaching who got their start from Chuck Hildebrand, or later on got their start from the summer institutes that we did on the Holocaust beginning in 2002. And so I take some comfort in knowing those people are out there. But nonetheless, anybody who was a baby boomer, I was born in 1947, has to look around and say, what happened? I came of age in the 1960s. How did it lead to this? How did we get to the point where we're at? So it seems the lights are going off in the room. I hope that doesn't affect anything, but I'm not moving around a lot like I do if I'm standing up. But in any case, I think the center, or now the Cohen Institute, is more vital than it ever was. It's more important than it ever was. And recognizing that a modern, industrialized, scientific country that had any number of Nobel Prize winners in the sciences had the capacity to institutionalize the mass murder of people knowing that that could happen in Germany has to be important to us in recognizing that the world we live in is fragile.
Mm-hmm.
It's fragile. And so what is going on here is a consequence of Chuck's recognition of that fragility, his recognition that humanity is capable of great good. And certainly any study of the Holocaust has to include those people who were resistors and those people who were rescuers. But it also, but there's no reason to write an overture in a major key just because of that. What you have to recognize is they were a minority. They were a minority. That the vast majority of people watched it happening. They were bystanders. And Chuck became familiar with that concept, and it became very important to him. He also, there's nothing that made him angrier than Holocaust denial. Now, he and people that read the book will realize that he's talking about revisionism. He uses the word revisionism. He actually is talking about denial. And it's one of the unfortunate aspects of the passing of decades that when you see the word revisionism, I think it can be misconstrued. I almost believe that any historian who writes a new biography of Hitler, who writes a new history of the Third Reich, part of the reason that they're writing it is to revise something that had been written before based on some of the research that they have recently done. So revisionism is to some degree a very positive aspect of what history is. Denialism is completely different. And that's what troubled Chuck Hildebrandt, made him angry, made him furious. Chuck was a gentle soul, but there were times he could really lose his temper, and denialism is certainly one of those triggers for him.
So, I think well, I think we have enough time to read some excerpts from the book. But to your point, I think we need to fight this wave of denialism, and the center, the institute, is sort of first and foremost in helping to fight that. I certainly am in my work with the institute now, with bringing documents, original documents of the Holocaust, and sharing them with students, and just to ensure that they know that these things really happened.
Yeah.
And that they shouldn't forget.
It's a very difficult time to have a center that's devoted to study of the Holocaust. So let me just pick up a few things here. I've said a lot about Chuck. I'd like to read something that is
Please do.
It's the preface. It's the preface to the second part of the book. In fact, I think it would be worth noting, Rodney, that I wrote the history of Chuck's time as the founder of the center, and then I stopped. And I knew I wanted to do the second half, but it took me, to some degree, it took COVID to get me into it, because as you may recall, I was the co-director of the center for a year there when COVID hit, 2019, 2020. And the college was paying me to be in the center, but the college was basically locked up. And so I used the time that I sat in the office here using the archives. Some of those archives were still in the room that I was in, and then some of those archives were with you. And that's what finally led me to get to the second half of the story, and to finish that. This is the preface that I wrote I call it the second preface, because it's It divides Chuck's years from the years that I was the director. Many years ago, Elie Wiesel published a novel entitled The Forgotten. While virtually his entire corpus accentuates memory, be it individual or collective, Wiesel was, in this instance, exploring its opposite, the loss of memory. Any irony embedded in the title is only apparent. Wiesel once said that to forget the victims and the killers would be to betray the former while strengthening the latter. He insisted that when the Holocaust is remembered, it sensitizes people. It sensitizes people. So in writing The Forgotten, Wiesel was addressing the tragedy attached to the opposite of that to which he dedicated his life as a survivor, remembering. In the story, which focuses on the relationship between a survivor father and his adult son, the opposite of remembering is Alzheimer's. Elihan, the father, feels an urgency to tell Malkiel, his son, the story of his past before the disease robs him of his memory. What was forever important for Wiesel is the understanding that the present is linked to the past. For Wiesel, that past was the Holocaust. That past, he insisted, should grab you by the throat. It grabbed Chuck by the throat, without question. Then I go on. Alzheimer's disease forced Chuck Hildebrandt to retire. He was not ready to retire. His mantra, to remember and to teach, continued to give his life meaning. Born in 1933 in Canton, Ohio, his drive to explore the Holocaust was generated by memories of growing up during World War II in an often anti-Semitic environment. He too came to believe that remembering the Holocaust sensitizes people. As his successor, I represented the second generation. Born in 1947, I had no memories of Nazi Germany or the war. Memory for me needed to be acquired. Yet I did understand the importance of maintaining Chuck's commitment to remember. That, I think, in terms of what I have written in the book, that concept that comes out in those couple of paragraphs, what it is that drove Chuck to do what he did, being grabbed by the throat by a history that was man-made. It was man-made. This wasn't the result of a hurricane or a fire. This was a result of man's inhumanity. That's what he picked up. And I'm not saying that that's what drove me throughout my entire time as director. But now I see those years as being critically important in continuing his work. Let me pick a couple of other things. I know we're limited on time. Tell me when you want me to stop, because there's
we have a little time, so
okay. Okay. This is back when Chuck is in the classroom. He's teaching out in Portsmouth. No, in Durham. He's been invited to the new Durham school to discuss the Holocaust with Irina Kataski's sixth graders. These are sixth graders. Okay, we're talking about 12 years. They're 12 years old. The children sees the slides. He's got slides of chambers, mass graves, emaciated people reduced to shells of themselves. That is written in an article that was published in the local newspaper. There are some that would say 12 years old is too young to show that. But what's interesting is what comes out of that. One girl suggests the photos are depressing, while others ask perennially innocent but difficult questions. How could they do that? How could they not like someone because of their religion? Now, we all know it was bigger than religion, but that's the question as it's stated. Chuck responds by providing an in-depth history of Jew hatred up and through the myth that Jews were running the world. He tells the pupils that they shouldn't focus on Hitler. This is so key here. As far as I know, this is Chuck, Hitler never killed anyone personally. The real question is why an entire nation embraced his hatred. These people weren't crazy, he emphasizes, in reference to those Germans who carried out Hitler's orders. The people who did this were people like you and me. The words embody Chuck's core lesson. Grasping it is an important step in preventing a similar event from recurring. You can't say certain things can't happen, he says. From the Holocaust, we learned that human beings can do anything. Concluding the class with a discussion of racism, one child mentions that there were a couple of Black pupils in the school, and another says, they're just like normal people. A third immediately responds, they are normal people. These are 12-year-olds. While the distinction seems tiny, it provides evidence of a heightened sensitivity. It underscores the importance of Chuck's role that day in a sixth grade classroom. It's statements like that. I could read any number of comparable statements that Chuck makes in response to students, and almost every one of them come back to you and me. We're responsible. We're responsible. We have the ability to make this happen or to prevent it happening. He once makes a comment, I think in an interview, that prejudice is learned in the home. It reminded me of Stephen Louis was somebody who was very involved in our work in the center, especially working with Tom White. He was a survivor, a German survivor, who ended up going in the military and serving the U.S. Army after getting out of Germany. He used to say that prejudice and hatred are learned at the breakfast table. So every child comes to school not as a blank slate, but with things that they have heard, things that they stimulate how they respond to other children around them. And Chuck was very, very aware of that and saw its importance. And so that's something that I'll stress. Let me just bring something a little more up to date. Okay, this will be. It looks like it needs to be the last thing that I read here.
And we should have a little time for questions. But go ahead.
Okay. Among those who bore witness to Reichskristallnacht, identified by some historians as the first act of the Holocaust, was Sybil Augusta Sophie von Zell, a 15-year-old German baroness living at the time in the Berlin suburb of Dahlem. Raised a Lutheran, Sybil attended Dahlem's St. Anne's Church, pastored in the early 1930s by Martin Niemöller, among the leaders of the Confessing Church, a Protestant group that opposed the Nazification of Germany's Protestant churches. From a young age, Sybil had been infatuated by Niemöller. In 1971, as a German expatriate living in the United States, she became his wife. He was more than 30 years her senior. They ran into each other on an elevator, I believe, in New York City. And so it was an astounding coincidence that she had admired this man, infatuated by him from childhood. Tom White's fascination with Sybil, who both he and Paul met in March of 2003 when they attended the 33rd Annual Scholars Conference in Philadelphia, resulted in the Cohen Center's inviting her to keynote the Kristallnacht remembrance on the occasion of the 65th anniversary of the Night of Broken Glass. While young in 1938, Sybil apprehended the horror and tragedy of that night for what it was. An unabashed crime against the country's Jews and a scar on the soul of both the Germans and humanity. Her words were communicated with a painful poignancy. In fact, Sybil and her family may have perceived the Nazis' crimes more deeply than the average German. Born to an old and esteemed Prussian aristocratic family, her two grandfathers and her three great-grandfathers were Prussian generals. Ulrich Freiherr von Zell, her father, served as a German diplomat before the First World War and became, after the war, the personal financial advisor of Germany's exiled emperor, Kaiser Wilhelm II. The late emperor, meanwhile, was Sybil's godfather. We had some remarkable people who came and shared their stories with us, and none, I would say, more remarkable than Sybil. Sybil, who corrected the statement about who came for the Germans and who did I not speak up for, that her husband was so responsible for. First, they came for the communists, then they came for the socialists, then they came for the trade unionists, then they came for the Jews. And too often the Jews are put first, but there was a different progression in the history. With an estimated 550 people gathered at Keene Middle School's Larrissy Auditorium, Sybil told her audience that the question of why we must remember the Holocaust can be answered easily, because it happened. To end her address, she paraphrased the late Martin Luther King, if we do not learn to be in peace together, we will all die fools. I'm going to leave it at that, but I would suggest to people that are listening that Sybil was only one of a remarkable number of people who were witnesses, who were survivors, who are historians that have brought a great deal of light to the work that was done at the Holocaust Center during those years. Many of them have passed away.
Mm-hmm. And it'll be this book will be a wonderful record of those people and your work, and as well as Chuck's. So I'm glad to be part of it, and I have to say that the book will be as part of our collection of special collections and available there, and also available for those of you who might be interested in having an ebook copy. And so I'm sure this institute will share information about receiving a copy later. So.
Wouldn't have happened without the archives. It wouldn't have happened without the archives.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm glad to be part of it. And so thank you, Paul. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to hop back in at the end here to thank you both for such a great conversation. It's really inspiring and also, I think, helpful to revisit this early history in the present moment, because we are in this time now where the Institute is launching so many new programs and initiatives over the next few years, and it's very exciting. But it's also a good reminder to hear you talk today, Paul, about this early phase of this history, because it's a reminder to me that the core values that have been established along the way are still with us. And especially this notion that you expressed of it takes a village. This is really core to our work today. So much of the Institute's work happens in partnership, in meaningful partnership with others across the region, across the state, and increasingly across the globe as well. So I very much appreciate the work that both of you did to create this book and also to share it with us today. And as Rodney was saying, we will make sure to follow up with everybody who attended today's session to share out a copy of the electronic book as well. So thank you both so much, and I hope we'll be able to continue our conversations moving forward as well.
Thank you. I'm honored to be invited to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you all. Be well.